This podcast is brought to you by Big Motoring World, one of the UK's largest used car supermarkets. To verify and find out more, go to bigmotoringworld.co.uk. Welcome to Legends of News, the podcast that taps into the experience and insight of those who spent many decades in front row seats at the making of history, as the phrase goes. You'll be getting a unique perspective from people who've personally witnessed and sometimes created some of the most extraordinary moments of the last half a century and more. My guest today is somebody who represents the muscularity of our regional news programmes in the UK, whose tea time programmes often beat the national bulletins they sit alongside in the ratings. She absolutely dominated output for 20 years in Britain's largest county, but has been involved in quite a bit of controversy along the way. She is Yorkshire's own Christa Ackroyd. Welcome, Christa.
Thank you very much. I am honoured. And I'm not quite sure how I deserve the title, but we will see.
Oh, you are indeed. We're honoured to have you. Let's just explain for people who, don't live in Yorkshire or haven't been there, about the two programmes, both huge programmes, Calendar on ITV and Look North on the BBC. You worked for them both.
I did. I was one of those few people who jumped ship, but literally a mile away. So instead of going to the dizzy heights of London, people kept saying to me, why don't you go to London? I said, well, kind of Yorkshire's my bedrock, it's my home, and I like Yorkshire. So all I did eventually was I jumped from Yorkshire Television to the BBC, which caused great scandal at the time. People asked me why I did it, and let me explain. It's really important that people know it wasn't for money, it wasn't for glory. At the time, Granada had bought Yorkshire Television, and having worked there for well over a decade with my gorgeous late friend Richard Whiteley alongside me every night, can you imagine how much fun that was? There was a discussion that perhaps the regional news for the north of England may come from Manchester. And as somebody who is still smarting over the War of the Roses and the fact that we didn't win, it was one step too far. So they've been chasing me for 2 years, and I decided I was going to go to the opposition, and I was marched out of the door, quite literally, with my things. Given 3 months. Well, I don't blame them. They could hardly have me on, and then the following day be on Look North. But that's how it happened.
But just explain, that introduction I gave there, that just how popular, but they're more than popular, these news programmes are in their localities. They're embedded. They much more accurately reflect the people that watch them than the national bulletins.
Well, I would say they used to, if you want me to be controversial. I think they're a bit formulaic at the moment. I think the national masters are putting their stamp on it. For example, I know that in ITN or in the ITV regions, they're insisting on doing a shared piece that goes out in all the regions, and it would be so against what I believe in. Most of them are single headers, and the fact that I had such a fantastic on-screen relationship for 25 years in total was down to the fact that I shared a sofa with two of the most wonderful broadcasters that I've ever lived, who sadly I have lost and I miss every day. Harry Gratian on Look North and Richard Whiteley, the legend, on Calendar. And we didn't treat it as a news bulletin. We treated it, as Richard told me from that very first day, it's a show. Yeah. News can be overwhelming. I mean, you must have heard this a million times, but I know so many people say to me, I can't watch the news at the moment. That's not what we're there to do, to turn people off. So the balance of the regions meant that we always genuinely believed, I don't believe it's particularly true now, that we would go in, we would do the biggest story. We would give it the absolute everything we had. And if it was worth 6 minutes, we'd do 6 minutes. If it was worth 10, we'd do 10. But we always resolved, A, to have live guests in the studio that were not journalists talking to other journalists. It's so annoying, Dermot. I turn on my television and I go, Well, I've just seen your report. Why are you talking to other journalists? Why aren't you talking to the people at the heart of the story, which is news for me? Ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances. So we always insisted that we didn't have an expert. We didn't talk to each other, or I insisted, and that we would end the programme on something not light, but something funny, memorable. Often something funny and memorable happened during the programme because, working with Richard, it was quite a journey. So it was a balanced programme, but it always had to end with positivity. Because if you just watch half an hour of national and world news, the last thing you want is half an hour of doom and gloom from your region. That's why I think it worked. And as you say, it's really strange because to get 1 million viewers on Calendar or Look North, as we often did, was more than breakfast television, and more often than the national bulletins. And that's because I think in the end, I was determined, Richard was determined, Harry was determined. We were so proud of our roots that it would be reflective of those we were broadcasting to.
How did you get to Calendar? I mean, you earned your journalistic chops, didn't you? You started, didn't you, at Halifax, the Halifax Courier, then radio, and didn't you have I'm thinking early 80s, Yorkshire, you must have had a baptism of fire with the Ripper case.
That was my first ever story.
Blimey.
So I became a journalist at 18. I carry, as many Yorkshire people do, not a chip on my shoulder, but a sack of spuds. And one of my biggest chips is the fact that I never went to university, because the number of times I've been asked in polite company, which university did you go to? Which really means that if I gave an answer that it was actually not the one that they think I should have gone to, meant that they were going to look down on me. To say none at all is really interesting, the reaction that you get. I was lucky. I was indentured. It was an old-fashioned apprentice. And what's so wonderful about that, Dermot, is you got to go to uni, or you've got to go to poly and do your proficiency test, but it's a degree standard, your journalism skills. But you got paid to do it. So I got paid to pretend to be a student for 4 months a year. And then, which was fab, because I was in a bed and breakfast, not
like most students.
It was fab. So I kind of wore the Aniga jeans, I wore the cheesecloth shirts of the 70s, looked like a student, and then went back and put on my posh suit to go and work in the newspaper. It was a baptism of fire. The subs terrified me. The first day they came over, the sub-editors, and said to me, "Your spelling's atrocious," and they bought me a dictionary. I never made another spelling mistake. Forget the days of spell check. It was literally, the subs were on you like, they'd say, "That intro is terrible, do it again and again." It was a great, great learning curve. But while I was there, and I was 19 years old, I was living in a tiny little terraced house, and there was a knock on my door, and it was the photographer that I always worked with, Jim Moran, great photographer. Went on to win every award in journalism in terms of photography. And he said, "Look, my mate, the bus driver, has just told me that unfortunately there's a body in the poshest area of Halifax." So I got in his car, a battered old Beetle, and I went down. And there it all started, because Josephine Whittaker was the 9th girl to die. At the time we thought it was the 10th, but it was the 9th. And it could not possibly be the Ripper, because it was on a foggy morning, but in, as I say, the poshest part of town. If you think Hampstead Heath, or you think all those, it was an open space surrounded by huge, huge Victorian houses. Judge James Pickles had one. Anyone who was anybody lived around Savile Park, as it was called. So it couldn't be the dark grey lights, the dark red light areas, the dark grey shadowy corners where the Ripper had been hunting for the last 3 years. But it was. And that was to change everything. I went back to the news desk and I said, well, obviously I was there and I want to go to the press conference. And they said, no. We have a crime reporter and it's better that a man does it. And I fought the first of many battles and said, but this is the ultimate crime against women. I want to go. I eventually won. I was allowed to go. And as I walked in the press conference, very loudly I heard the words, "What are we doing letting Totty coming in?"
Good
I was
God.
the only woman in the room. So it was a crime against women. Police women were literally there to make cups of tea and do the filing. And we all know what happened. It was that press conference where the phrase, the first innocent victim. And even then, as a 19-year-old, I had to say something. So I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And they went, well, not a prostitute. And my dad was a policeman. And he always taught me to fight truths. And then do you know what happened? They all went. The journalists, the people that I now know and became really good friends with, they all went to the men only bar. The journalists went with the police to a local pub that did not allow women. I mean, it's hard to imagine this. This was late 70s. And I was left in a police station going, well, that wasn't exactly a great blow for feminine power, because they're going to get the story and I'm not. And an old-fashioned desk sergeant who looked like something out of All Creatures Great and Small or Heartbeat called me over and said, I've got something for you. And it was a piece of paper, and in it was the address of Josephine's mum. And he said, I'd never let that rabble go. She wants to talk to somebody. And by the time they came out of the pub, we'd done the front page. We had the interview. It was the first time I'd ever had to knock on somebody's door and say, I'm really sorry. And I've had to do it many times since. Yeah. But it was that sense of injustice. That's what drove me.
Yeah.
That sense of...
I mean, I get the emotion. It's still with you now, isn't it?
It still angers me now. It still upsets me. And go 20, 30 years later, and I was asked to do a documentary for Netflix about the Ripper. And by that time, many friends. I became friends with some of the survivors, still am today. Tracy, Olive, who survived. I was asked to do the eulogy at her funeral because I fought her case. Imagine being alive and being told he's only after prostitutes. Imagine having to wear that badge, the whispers that happened. So I felt I was fighting this lone battle as a woman. And I was.
Yeah.
I literally was. But the anger that I felt suddenly turned into, I have a role to play. I have to question. I have to say, I was only 19, 20. I have to say, especially when they caught him as a Bradfordian. Hang on a minute. First, what was the first question? You told us he had a Geordie accent. You told us he was from the Northeast. You didn't say this could be. It came around. The poster said, this is the voice of the Ripper. So, of course, the first question was, you got it wrong. Well, they laid into me and said, you're watching me. We got it wrong. It was a difficult case. And I went, you got it wrong in so many ways. So when the Netflix documentary came up, I said, I'll only do it if the women are put to the fore.
Yeah.
I am sick to death of seeing hearing stories in prison about Sutcliffe.
Let's not glamorise him with this kind of Ripper epithet. Peter Sutcliffe, and he hated women, full stop.
Yeah, anybody was fair game.
Yeah.
I was at the court case. He spent a lot of time at the court case kind of staring at the only women who were there. I was there. I watched the agony that he had caused. The gallery full of families. I got to know the families really well. I remember, if you don't mind, if it's not too much, I want to share one story with you. It led me to do and to be everything that I became as a journalist. I went to see Barbara Leach's parents. Barbara died just after Josephine. She was a student in Bradford. And Sutcliffe attacked her on her way home from the pub. It was about 11 o'clock at night. And by that time I'd moved to radio, Dermot, and I was doing it for the network. It was the biggest story in the world, let alone in England. And Barbara's parents, David and Beryl, asked to do an interview. They were overwhelmed with people knocking on their doors, and they thought if they did one interview, it would end it. And in fact, it did. They'd found a mug in Barbara's room, and it was a Pennine radio mug. So they just rang and said, can we do an interview? So I found myself going to Kettering. And I'll never forget how it began. And as a journalist, you ask this question, you should never leave it in, because people go, what do you mean, how are they feeling? But you ask, how are you feeling? Because you want people who are listening to know the damage that's been done, to know the pain that people are going through. So I asked the question, I said, before we start, let me turn the tape on, how are you feeling? How are you coping? And David said to me something, and he developed a stutter with the stress. And he said to me, I remember when Barbara died, he said, Beryl went out to buy an outfit for her funeral. And as a journalist, I thought, wow, where is this going? We're talking about pain and we're talking about anger, not talking about outfits. And he said, and she went out and she bought the outfit. And when she came back, I raised my eyebrows a little at the price. It was really expensive. He said, but as she said to me, it wasn't just for her funeral. It was for her, he said, I'm crying now. It was for her graduation. It was for her wedding. It was for the christening of her children. And it was the last outfit that a mum could ever wear for her daughter. And I remember coming back on the motorway and stopping and listening to it, and stopping again and listening to it and thinking, that is what pain is. It's not about police officers calling girls totties or prostitutes. That is the story. The devastation that one man has caused. Women stopped living for 2 years. And the repercussions are still felt today. Many of my friends who were planning to go to university did not go because they were frightened, because 2 students died. Life was put on hold. And one man did that. But I want to say, one weedy, pathetic, insignificant, squeaky-voiced, 5'6" predator. And when I saw him that first time in court in Dewsbury, I thought, you are the person that's kept us indoors for year after year. And that really led to me always determined, and got quite a reputation for it, for questioning authority, as I questioned the police then, for asking tough questions, for carrying the banner for the real people in news. And that's those who've been affected and not the perpetrators.
We'll take a short break there. This podcast is brought to you by Big Motoring World, one of the UK's largest used car supermarkets. Big Motoring World checks vehicle pricing regularly to give you their best price guaranteed. And with their new finance package, you can get a rate as low as 9.9% APR, 11.9% APR representative. With a wide choice of vehicles and a focus on customer service, Big Motoring World supports drivers through each step of the process. Their stated aim is to be, in their words, big on what matters to you. Search bigmotoringworld.co.uk to verify and to find your nearest store. That is bigmotoringworld.co.uk. I'm often asking people on this podcast about their inspiration for getting into news, and it was, quite often, reading papers, watching television, being interested in current affairs or whatever. But your inspiration was strong Yorkshire women from quite a long time ago.
200 years. And also women who were told that they couldn't do something but did, which is pretty much what happened to me, what we're doing letting Toshi in. I was the first woman news editor in radio. I was one of only 2 program controllers or program directors in radio. I was the first person ever to co-anchor, and that's what it said on my contract, in the regions in Yorkshire, because it was often 2 men did the interviews with people like Margaret Thatcher, and the women did the fluffy stuff. And so I'd already got my reputation, and I had to fight. I had to fight a lot. I remember when there was the first Gulf War, and I remember when the war had been declared, the producer came to me and said, I think it would be better tonight if 2 men did the news. I said, I'm sorry? And they said, no, I think it would be more fitting. So I said, right. So every woman whose son is going to war, every person who is worried about the consequences, every female, they're not going to actually be watching. So they don't need a female perspective. They don't need a tough questioner. So I said, I tell you what I'll do. This was at Calendar. I'd only been there for about 7 weeks. And I said, I tell you what I'll do. I'll go home. I'll ask you to read. There's a new act come out. It's called the Sex Discrimination Act. And I'd ask you to read that. I only had to sweat a 6-month contract, by the way. I'd left a staff job for 6 months. And we'll reconvene. I hadn't got to reception when they said, no, we've had a rethink. So even then I had to fight for women's voices on screen to be heard, as well as women's voices off screen. But it was a fight worth having. And it all came from
the Brontes. The Bronte
It came from the Brontes. It came from the fact that, I think everyone on telly, unless they're completely egotistical, suffer from the how the heck did I get here? Why me? And I really did suffer from it. So I was adopted. I was 10 days old, brought to Bradford. Told I was adopted, bounced on my dad's knee, said, you were chosen, you were special. I did not feel special. I felt abandoned. By the time I was 10, I was thinking, well, who am I? What am I doing? Who are my parents? And of course, the answer is the God shone down on me. I had the best parents in the world. And my dad was a police officer, one of the first to work in race relations, so a great pioneer in his own right. And he took me to a tiny little house. And he said, right, okay, I know you don't know who you are. Christa, it's not where you are, where you come from, it's where you are going. Don't look back. That's not the direction you should be following. He said, this tiny house, 3 girls were born here. Bradford girls. They wrote books, but they were told they shouldn't. They broke rules, and they were told they couldn't. And if they could do it 200 years ago, you can do it now. And they were the Brontes.
So what we got? Anne, Emily and Charlotte.
So we put them in the order they were born.
Okay. Oh, you do that for me.
Okay. Well, ironically and sadly, there were 5 Bronte sisters.
Right.
And Maria, named after her mum, and Elizabeth were to be the inspiration of Jane Eyre, of the death of Helen Burns. They died because their father believed in education. They were sent away. They caught TB. And they died aged 10 and 11. And Charlotte witnessed this. Charlotte was at the same school, and she immortalised them in the school, Lowood, in Jane Eyre. Because everything they wrote about was autobiographical. Everything. And everyone goes, well, how can you have experienced that? You've got to remember, Haworth then was a teeming, dirty, life expectancy was 24. It was a major merchant's route. Their father had come from Ireland and the famines. Self-taught, he got to Cambridge. William Wilberforce was his sponsor. So there was much talk about slavery and emancipation. These girls were allowed to read the newspapers of the day. That was shocking. They were allowed to read Byron, considered scandalous. So they had a view of the world that genteel women did not. They lived among chaos. They lived among death, cholera. They lived on the moors, bleak and dark. And they knew of the issues of the day. And they lived them. Anne became the governess. And she wrote about, the awful class of the governess, the class system. Charlotte wrote about, you say because, you think I am little. And humble and obscure, I stand here as your equal. That was one of the first feminist statements in Jane Eyre. And then, of course, we have Wuthering Heights. And Wuthering Heights is actually a story of race, because Heathcliff is almost certainly of dual ethnicity, found wandering on the docks of Liverpool. Wilberforce remained a great friend of Patrick Brontë. They would discuss the fact that the illegitimate children of white plantation workers or owners would be sent to Liverpool, and they would work in posh Georgian houses. And that's why it was, Heathcliff himself says, just because, I wish I were fair. I wish I had fair hair and fair skin, and then I could be as successful as he. It is a story about race. And so these were women 200 years before me who had tackled subjects that were absolutely taboo. And every single library in the world has a Brontë book.
That's true, yeah.
And so if I thought it was tough for them.
Well,
and yet they did it.
I mean, what an extraordinary story from your point of view, and an awful lot about the Brontes. I think a lot of people did not know, particularly about Wuthering Heights. But Christa, talk to me about the fun times. You know, this second you mentioned, let's start with, I was going to say Countdown because, calendar. I'm thinking Richard Whiteley, Why was he called? Why was he called? And that, have I answered it? I'm thinking, why was he called?
You've just answered it.
Twice Nightly Whiteley.
The Twice Nightly Whiteley was because, and Carol is one of my closest friends, and sadly I just lost his partner, Kathy, who was my closest friend. And together we were it is so politically non-correct, but I'm going for it anyway. Because if Richard said something, he could get away with it that other people couldn't. We were his quality birds. He once called us together. We took us out for lunch. He said, "You are my quality birds." Richard likes strong women. He liked Kathy Apanovich, who was a great actress, and broadcaster in her own right. Carol, tough, clever. Me, doesn't take any rubbish from anybody. And he said, "You are my quality birds." So we became known as QBs, and we always called each other QBs on the phone, in Christmas cards, on text. QB1 was Kathy, QB2 was me, and QB3 was Carol. I spoke to Carol yesterday and she ended up saying, "Okay, QB, love you, see you later." And that's because of Richard. So Twice Nightly Whiteley was because he was on Countdown in the afternoon with Carol, and he was on Calendar with me in the evening. He used to respond by saying, more once yearly nearly, because he was very funny and very dry, and that's how we became QBs, and that's how he became Twice Nightly Whiteley. He was hilarious to work with. He hated earpieces and being told what to do. So sometimes if you thought an interview was going great, he'd just simply take it out and carry on. People would be screaming. Sometimes if you didn't quite understand them, he would go, "I'm sorry, I think they're talking to me. I don't quite understand what's going on. Christa," and pass to me as if to say, and he'd go, "Well, you always understand it." He hated it.
That's live on air as well. I mean, so it's quite a high wire act for you.
No, because you know what? We used to almost forget we were on air. It was like going to work for 23 years with two of my best friends. There's a great time. We got into so much trouble. We got into trouble all the time. There's a great time that we were announcing the 100th anniversary of Marks and Spencer's. And of course, born in a Leeds market, everything was a penny. And Harry had made this great joke about the fact that he'd been down there that day and he bought me a present. Because that day in the market, everything was a penny. And he said he spent the penny in the market and he pulled out this enormous pair of knickers. Oh, this enormous pair of knickers. And I looked at him with my usual disdain. I had a really good way of going, "I'm sorry." And he said to me, "I decided these would suit you and I bought these for you." And I said, "Well, you've never spent as much on a present ever, 1p. And I looked at them and I threw them back at him. And the producer was going, "This is not acceptable. This is offensive," which of course it wasn't offensive. It wasn't offensive. It wasn't titillate. It was, I mean, if you could have seen them, they were just big old granny knickers. And that's what they were famous for. Marks and Spencer started selling knickers. That's how they started. Knickers and socks, But they were going, "You can't do this. Move on, move on." So all Harry did was he just picked them up and he took them in his suit pocket as if they were a handkerchief, and did the whole of the next link into Yorkshire cricket with them hanging down. They were screaming. Well, that was it. I lost it. And people say, "What did you do when you lost it?" I lost it frequently, laughing with Richard. Never in the wrong place, because news was very serious to me. But if it was funny. And if somebody had been cleverly, as both of those two were, I used to lose it. People say, "What did you do?" And he said, "Well, do you know what I used to do? I used to nip my thumb so hard it hurt and think of my mortgage." And that would soon.
That sure works.
I believe that, the "don't look back, it's not where you're going" was the best piece of advice I ever got. I'm still looking forward, but life is full of circles, and circles are complete. And in May this year, after a 2-year campaign that I effectively led, we bought that little house for the community, for the nation. And the place where the Brontes were born, which isn't Haworth and isn't the parsonage everybody thinks it is, it's a tiny little terraced house, is now open to the public to show young children like other Christas, other Dermots, that wherever you are in life, whatever your circumstance, where you can achieve great things.
And you can visit it now, can you? You can go inside?
Visit it, and guess who I got to open it? I have not lost my touch. I have not lost my determination. I thought, who do I want to open this? And of course, Judi Dench, has been a chairman. Kate Bush has suddenly, immortalised them in Wuthering Heights. But I thought, no. Do you know what? To me, they were queens of Bradford and queens of literature. And of course, our queen has her own charity, the Reading Room, which is about literacy and literature and bringing back the classics for young people, all young people. And so she opened it. So I wrote, it took 18 months and she opened it and she just loved it. In fact, the last words were, when can I come back?
And what an asset it is then to Bradford. I mean, 2025 City of Culture.
My home city. Not my home city, really, but I was 10 days old, so I think, I've earned the right to call it my home city when I got there. I'm really proud of it. It's much maligned. It's looked down upon. It is the happiest, strongest, most historic, most forward-looking. It's the youngest city in Britain. It's the fastest growing city in Britain. Its population is rising, not decreasing, as is true of many others. Its multiculturalism, which I grew up as part of, is a joy. I could pleat a sari when I was 10. I can make a curry. I host the World Curry Festival, and that includes Caribbean curry as well as Malaysian curry.
Please ask me up for the next one. Whoa, yes, please.
It's in September. You can come as my guest. You can cook for me with us on stage.
I won't eat for a month.
We bring chefs from all over the world, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, etc., because curry is different in different parts of the world. But it's the joy of learning. It's what sparked my journalism. What do you mean? What do you mean you don't believe in Jesus? Or you do believe in Jesus, but he was a prophet? Those were questions I was asking as a 7-year-old and 8-year-old, and enjoying the answers and the discussion and the debate. And as I say, I was eating curry for breakfast because my friend ate curry for breakfast. I was pleating a sari just as she was wearing my cheesecloth top. It was joyous. And we have to remember that difference is interesting. It's fascinating. It's there to be celebrated, not to be poked fun at, or worse still, not to be considered reason to divide. Bradford in the 70s was amazing. And you know something? I'm just going to give you a little story that I always quote, and that is, it was the Muslim community in the 1980s when the synagogue in Bradford was closing that raised the money to keep the synagogue open. Wow. I just leave that there.
Yeah, no, leave it out there for everyone.
Joyous. Yeah. It's joyous. Let's remember that. I was down in London when the riots were on with two of my friends, Salima and Nazreem, and together we literally prayed it would not happen in Bradford, because after the riots of 20 odd years ago, nearly 30 years ago, we just couldn't cope with it again. We suffered the stigma of those riots, and it never came to Bradford. And we sat there and said, that's because we've learned our lesson. So I'm really proud of my home city, as you can tell.
I really can. Chris, I just want to touch on, though, the broadcasting years. You said there you missed the live broadcasting, and I mentioned controversies you've been involved in, not of your own making, but you left. Look North, and I've read. That's what I'm asking you, because I read the headlines, and so I mean, thank you for being so frank. Were you? I mean, you said you were marched out of the door at Calendar. Were you more or less marched out of the door at Look North?
I could understand that. Listen, I'd just gone into Canada to
tell
them
very different. Yeah. But I mean, you were on air one night on Look North and then gone.
Yeah, and the phone call saying reminder that you're under contract and you can't say anything, while other people were saying things. And basically it led to me not working for 5 years.
Blimey.
It cost me my home. It cost me hundreds of thousands in legal fees. Worth every penny.
Why so?
Because my integrity was questioned. Because it was deemed by the Inland Revenue, HMRC, that my contract was flawed, that I wasn't a freelancer. I should have been employed. I should have been a staff member at the BBC. I was the only one. And they told me, it's very like the post office, Dermot. They told me you're the only one. I said, I can't be. I'm not the only one to have been told to set up a company and to be employed through that. And I mean, I know I'm special, but I'm not that special.
Yeah, I mean, there were loads of presenters at the BBC who got in the same situation. Yeah.
But they didn't want you to. Do you know what? It sounds strange. I really am a big supporter of the BBC. I just wish they get their crisis management into gear. Because if they'd just said, right, we've got a problem here with these contracts, we're going to help you, we're going to back you, we're going to support you, we're going to do everything that's right. But, it took me to go and fight. It took a judge. I lost the case in terms of IR35, but a judge declared me honest and to question the BBC contracts. I then had some very supportive MPs. It ended up going to a common select committee. I was sacked by then. I was persona non grata. People walked to the other side of the street in my industry.
How did that feel, though? Just let me interject here, Christa. As a journalist, where, we always, don't we, try and not impose ourselves on a story. We're not the story, but you clearly were. Questions about you in Parliament, as you say, MPs, saying what's going on with Christa Ackroyd.
MPs asking the BBC where I was.
Yeah.
MPs, then the whole of these contracts became the subject of a common select committee as a result of me taking it to a tribunal, and that the judge saying, look, I don't find in your favour with HMRC, but I find you to be honest, and I find the BBC contract to be at fault, which is exactly what it was. I hope that you don't find this conceited. I'm 68 years old. It's very rare. Yesterday, I was up at 8 o'clock filming for a national network for Channel 5, Our Great Yorkshire Life. You can still watch my Ripper documentary on Netflix. Amazon Prime just dropped my Crossbow Cannibal documentary. Do you really think if I hadn't been of such strong character, determined to fight, to reclaim my name, that at the age of 68, I would still be considered relevant?
Well, there's an easy answer to that. We don't need to say it. And you're still writing, aren't you? I mean, journalistically, you're a forthright columnist, I must say, in the Yorkshire Post.
Do you know, I wrote for 10 years. I wrote for the Express.
Yeah.
And the Sunday Express. And that's how circles. I only wanted to be a journalist because A, I could do English and not maths. B, people used to come up and tell me their stories. And C, my life stopped on a Thursday when the Jean Rook column appeared in the Express, because I had to get my own breakfast. I mean, that's terrible. My mum said, get your own breakfast because I'm reading Jean Rook. I thought this woman has power. She was also a Yorkshire woman. She was from Hull. I thought, I want to be Jean Rook. My mum did everything for me apart from on a Thursday. And so I wanted to be. 20 years later, I found myself walking over Blackfriars Bridge into the Express office with Rosie Boycott, who then said, you wouldn't like to do the Jean Rook column, would you? And I did it for 12 years. So that's another circle complete. I love writing. Writing is my thing. And something, I don't want to sound that, but let me go back to the BBC. It's a lesson for us all. It's a lesson. When I became the subject of news, it brought home to me again how difficult it is to be in the headlines. And what I don't like about journalism, and I was good. I knew the system. I also knew not to say anything until the right time, and now is the right time. What I wanted to say to people is new journalists who were going into it, because I think they will watch this, Dermot, and say, oh, let's have a listen, see what the legends are. Don't fall for clickbait. Don't go in with your camera running. Don't demand an interview. Make sure you're accurate. Make sure that when you leave somebody you've spoken to, they feel that it was something that was positive, that helps them or others. Not that you've got a scoop. I got many scoops, but I did them by asking politely and quietly if somebody was ready to talk to me. I don't like the journalism that we have now. I don't like the fact that, the comments are unchecked in both local newspapers. That it stirs up a you're right, you're wrong kind of scenario. That's not what we were there to do. We were there to tell stories. And to journalists today, if you want to go on telly, then you shouldn't be a journalist. It's not about being on television. I'm sitting here, I'm not worried that, is my lipstick crooked? You've seen me. I've been in floods. I've been up to my eyes in flooding in Yorkshire. Yorkshire was always flooding. I've been, in terrible. I've been in snow. The M62 was always blocked. I've been soaking wet. It's not about how you look. It's not about being on telly. It's just a vehicle to tell stories, and it's not your story. It's other people's story. So that would be my. Somebody said to me, "What do you want your legacy to be?" And my legacy was. Initially I said she just told stories, and then not her. So the BBC is so minute, and I do love the BBC and all it stands for. And one day they'll learn how to cope with crises. I want my legacy to be as they literally put me in the ground. I said, but another voice will be going, but just another thing. There's one more thing to do. There's one more story to tell. I wanted to say on my gravestone, just one more thing, because there are so many stories to tell. Look at the post office. How could we have envisaged that would happen? And there'll be other situations where good journalism is the solution and the answer to people's problems.
One more story to tell, and you're still telling them. Listen, I know what I think your epitaph, if it is that should be, is any young women in particular watching this say, I want to be Christa Ackroyd. Continue attacking that glass ceiling. I mean, wow.
You don't. Because then when I've finished, I'll come off here and go, oh, was that all right? I'll then go into complete angst. I'll then look and realise that my mascara was smudged. I'll then think, why am I doing this interview? It's only Christa from Bradford. Imposter syndrome is alive and kicking. But that's not why we do the job. We do it to tell stories. And if we all remember that, the world's the better place.
And it's that attitude is why you were doing it for so long. And Christa, really, I mean, an absolute joy meeting you, talking to you. You must come back very soon. But for now, thank you very much indeed. Christa Ackroyd.